I said, "Are you happy?" And she said, "I have a certain peace of mind."
Princess Charlene and Prince Albert of Monaco have spent years painting the perfect royal picture through glamorous events, public smiles, and matching outfits. But behind palace walls, their lives are riddled with escape attempts, heartbreak, and haunting silence. The whole marriage has been anything but magical for Charlene. People are now asking, did she ever truly want this life? And how much longer can she keep playing this royal role? Join us as we peek through the palace curtain and reveal everything. Princess Charlene's controversial marriage to Prince Albert. Princess Charlene's marriage to Prince Albert of Monaco sounds like a perfect match made in heaven. From the outside, it all looked perfect, a real-life fairy tale set in the glittering heart of Monaco. The charming prince, the graceful bride, the jaw-dropping wedding. But look closer, and something always felt just a little off. The smiles didn't always reach the eyes. The warmth never felt natural. And the silence? It said more than any official palace statement ever could. For Princess Charlene, her story wasn't one of glass slippers or happily ever after. It was one of quiet resistance, and a life that looked like a dream, but often felt like a cage. Over the years, she dropped clues through absence, through body language, and when she finally spoke, through hauntingly quiet words. When asked about her happiness, she didn't celebrate. She simply said she had found a certain peace of mind. And in that small sentence, everything changed. What you are about to see will change everything you thought you knew about the Monaco royals. Charlene's story began like something out of a royal fantasy. Charlene Wittstock was a young South African swimmer with Olympic dreams and a quiet elegance. Prince Albert, Monaco's famously elusive bachelor, met her in 2000 at a swimming event. Cameras flashed. She smiled. He noticed. Over time, their paths began to cross more frequently, and the world leaned in. Could this finally be his queen? To many, it looked like destiny. He was royalty, born into a legacy. She was poised, athletic, and modest. They fit the image perfectly, but that's just it. It was always about the image. Right from the start, the spotlight wasn't just on their relationship. It was on the role she was expected to play. Almost immediately, the comparisons started. Charlene, the statuesque blonde with a calm demeanor, was quickly dubbed the next Grace Kelly. After all, Grace had also crossed continents to become Monaco's princess, leaving behind a career, a country, and a life. But Grace wasn't just a woman in Monaco. She was a symbol, a fairy tale forever frozen in time. And Charlene wasn't just stepping into a marriage, she was stepping into a legacy that came with impossible expectations. Being the new Grace Kelly wasn't a compliment, it was a burden. When their engagement was announced in 2010, the world cheered. The palace sparkled with optimism, and the media ran wild with headlines about a modern fairy tale. But beneath the surface, not everyone was convinced, and most of all, Charlene didn't seem convinced. According to observers, her expressions were reserved, her eyes tired, and her public appearances were tightly controlled. Something didn't add up. Then came the escape rumors. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Reports emerged that Charlene had tried to leave Monaco on multiple occasions before the wedding. Once in Paris, once during the Monaco Grand Prix, and again just days before the ceremony. Each time she was allegedly stopped. Whether she was persuaded, pressured, or prevented, it was never made clear. But the fact that a bride reportedly tried to flee 3 separate times says more than 1,000 royal speeches ever could. Despite the reports, the wedding went on, a 3-day event filled with designer gowns, operatic performances, and a guest list packed with royalty and celebrities. Monaco put on a show, and the cameras captured every angle. But even with all the splendor, what people noticed will shock you. Charlene was in tears. Not tears of joy, not tears of love. They were slow, quiet, and deeply sad. Standing beside her new husband, wearing one of the most expensive dresses in the world, she looked more trapped than triumphant. After the wedding, Charlene did what she was expected to do. She posed, she waved, she smiled, but none of it felt real. Her smile looked forced. Her body language was rigid. She barely spoke in interviews, and when she did, her words felt like they had been reviewed and rehearsed. It was clear the fairy tale was still being broadcast, but the princess was slowly fading behind the curtain. Then she started disappearing. At first, it was subtle, fewer public appearances, skipped events, last-minute cancellations. The palace always had an excuse. She is sick, fatigue, private matters, but the absences piled up. People began asking questions. Where was Princess Charlene? And more importantly, why did it feel like she didn't want to be seen? By 2014, Charlene gave birth to twins, Jacques and Gabriella. For most royal families, the arrival of heirs is a joyous moment, a symbol of continuity and celebration. And for Charlene, it should have been a turning point. But even motherhood didn't seem to anchor her to palace life. She continued to make limited public appearances, and when she did, she often looked solemn, detached, or simply exhausted. Photographs with her children often showed a woman doing her duty, but not basking in joy. The emotional connection, the spark, and the ease were missing. Of course, no one expected her to be perfect, but it was clear she was trying to meet expectations that were never really hers to begin with. Throughout it all, Charlene never lashed out publicly. She didn't break protocol or air grievances. Instead, she let the silence speak, and when she finally did speak to the world, she didn't try to reframe the past. She simply said she had found peace, not happiness, not fulfillment, just peace. It was the kind of line that didn't make headlines the way scandals do, but it stayed with people, because it confirmed what many had suspected all along, that this fairy tale was never hers. It had been built around her, painted onto her, and pushed in her direction. But it didn't fit. And maybe that's the real story here. Not of rebellion or scandal, but of quiet disconnection. A woman who did everything expected of her and still never found herself in the role she was handed. As the years passed, the palace continued to project an image of unity. Official photos, formal statements, elegant events. But Charlene's story was unfolding under it all. And now, with the world finally starting to listen, there's a sense that something is about to change. Because when a woman like Charlene finally begins to find her own voice, even after years of silence, it's not just about what she says, it is about what she does next. And that's exactly where the story is heading. Keep watching. How Prince Albert's past haunted Charlene. Before we explain Princess Charlene's next move, we must give some context about her life with Prince Albert. And this takes us a little bit back to when they got married. Just when the world was watching Monaco for a royal love story, a quiet storm began building behind the palace walls. It wasn't in the tabloids just yet, but the signs were already showing. In the final weeks before Princess Charlene was set to marry Prince Albert, a story broke that would change everything. A woman in Brazil came forward with a shocking claim. Her daughter, born years earlier, was allegedly fathered by the prince. The child wasn't a baby anymore. She was already around 8 years old, which meant the timing of her conception overlapped with Charlene and Albert's early relationship. The story came out like a grenade tossed into a room full of glass, and suddenly the fairy tale wedding had a massive crack in the center. This wasn't Albert's first scandal involving children born out of wedlock. He had already acknowledged 2 others, one in the United States, another in France. So the idea of another child wasn't impossible. But for Charlene, the difference was all about timing. This wasn't a case of something that happened long before they met. This was about a child who, according to the timeline, could have been conceived during the early days of their romance. For Charlene, that changed the whole meaning of their story. If it was true, she hadn't just fallen for a prince with a past. She had been drawn into something that was still happening, something messy, public, and deeply personal. There were questions people whispered but didn't ask out loud. Did Charlene know about the Brazilian child before she accepted the engagement? Did the palace shield her from the truth until it was too late? Or did she learn about it when the rest of the world did, with no warning and no choice in how it hit her? No one knew for sure, but her face at public events around that time started to change. The light behind her eyes dimmed, She stopped speaking freely and looked more and more like someone trying to get through a storm with her head down. There were still smiles, but they stopped reaching her eyes, and every step closer to the wedding seemed heavier than the last. Things are about to get a lot more interesting. Keep watching. The palace didn't sit quietly. Albert's lawyers moved fast, shutting down the Brazilian claim with public statements and legal firepower. They dismissed it as lies. They said it was just a distraction, something made up to hurt the prince's reputation. But there was no public DNA test, no investigation that people could follow. The claim didn't exactly go away, it just went quiet. What didn't go quiet, though, was the emotional wreckage left behind. Whether the child was his or not, the damage had been done. For Charlene, it was another weight added to a marriage that hadn't even begun. And this marriage wasn't going to be a quiet one. Charlene wasn't just saying yes to a man. She was stepping into a title, a palace, and a role that came with expectations she couldn't change. She had to look flawless. She had to be a mother to the future ruler of Monaco. She had to stand beside her husband like everything was fine, even when nothing was. People started to realize she wasn't just adjusting to royal life, she was acting through it. And the script they gave her? It didn't seem written with her voice in mind. Then came some other whispers, and they weren't good ones. French media started reporting that Charlene's passport had been taken away to keep her from fleeing Monaco before the wedding. They said she tried to run, more than once, but palace officials stopped her. The palace, of course, called the claims absurd. They said the stories were made up and exaggerated. But still, the stories spread. When the wedding finally happened, it looked beautiful on the surface. A 3-day celebration with royalty, fashion, and orchestras. But we mentioned earlier that Charlene cried at the altar. Not soft tears of joy, but frozen, painful ones. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Her expression said what her voice never could. And just like that, what should have been a dream looked more like a production, a well-dressed performance with a heartbreaking lead role. The Brazilian child's story slowly vanished from the headlines. There were no updates, no court battles, no dramatic resolution. It just faded, like so many royal controversies tend to do. But Charlene didn't forget. The world didn't forget either. It stayed there, a ghost behind every photo and every public appearance. People began seeing her not as a princess living a dream, but as a woman walking through a scripted nightmare she didn't write, because by this point the truth was getting harder to hide. And now it seems Princess Charlene plans to escape Monaco. How could that be? Stay tuned as we break it down. Princess Charlene's escape plan. If Princess Charlene's actions in the past years are anything to go by, then it is likely she plans to run away from Albert. In recent times, Princess Charlene was front and center one day, standing beside Prince Albert, waving at crowds, playing the part. Then, like a flicker in the wind, she was gone on another. In 2021, she left Monaco for South Africa on what was supposed to be a short charity trip. No big announcements, no red flags. But weeks passed, then months, and silence started screaming. People began asking, where was she? And why wasn't she coming back? The official word was that she had developed a serious ear, nose, and throat infection. Something related to a sinus graft, they said. That she couldn't fly, that she was under care. But the longer she stayed away, the less that explanation seemed to hold. What kind of sinus infection keeps a royal grounded for 6 full months? And why did it conveniently come just as controversies around her marriage were heating up again? When July rolled around, it should have been a moment of celebration. 10 years since she married Albert, a full decade. Any other royal couple would have marked that milestone publicly. A joint photo, a public appearance, even a short statement. But there was nothing. No event, no appearance, no joint interview. Charlene didn't come back for it. And Albert didn't act surprised. It was like the anniversary didn't matter, like it was easier to ignore it than to explain it. In her absence, Albert stepped out alone. He attended events, posed for photos, and brought their twins, Jacques and Gabriella, along as a soft shield. He repeated the same message over and over. She's recovering. She'll be back soon. But he didn't look confident. And the longer he smiled through it, The more people noticed, he wasn't really smiling at all. Every now and then, a new photo of Charlene would surface. But something was always off. She looked thinner. Her expressions were far away, like she was there physically, but nowhere close emotionally. There was a shadow in her eyes, one that couldn't be airbrushed away. That wasn't all that people noticed. Her hair was shorter, her body language quieter, her presence dulled. It didn't look like recovery. It looked like someone slowly fading out. When she finally returned to Monaco in November, people expected a homecoming. But that's not what they got. She didn't jump back into royal duties. She didn't do interviews or show up for ceremonies. In fact, she disappeared again just weeks later. The palace released a carefully worded update. She needed more rest, more time, more privacy. It didn't add up, and it definitely didn't feel normal. Soon, whispers about a facility in Switzerland got louder. Not a hospital, but something more exclusive. A private treatment center for exhaustion, stress, emotional burnout, maybe all of the above. The location was never confirmed. No photos, no confirmation. Just the palace insisting she was safe and getting the care she needed. But the question never left. Was this a mental health crisis or her only way to escape? People couldn't agree. Some thought she was crumbling under pressure, the constant scrutiny, the isolation, the comparisons. Others believed this was finally her way out, a silent rebellion against a life she never truly chose. After all, a woman doesn't just disappear for most of a year unless something's seriously wrong, or unless she's done pretending everything is right. For the first time, Albert dropped the usual palace gloss. He admitted publicly that they were going through a tough period. Coming from a royal, that's as close to a confession as it gets. Suddenly, it was no longer just about health issues or work commitments. It was about them, their relationship, their future. When Charlene did return, she was changed. Not just in appearance, but in presence. She looked more guarded, sharper. The softness in her face was replaced with something else, maybe resolve, or distance, or both. Her smile, when it appeared, didn't stretch far, but there was something steadier behind it. Something that suggested she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was learning how to set boundaries, even in a palace made of rules. This wasn't the Charlene who stood silently at Albert's side years earlier, dressed in designer gowns and fighting back tears. And just as people began to accept this new version of her, something else started to change. Something closer to home. Something involving the kids, the palace structure, and maybe, just maybe, the future of Monaco itself. You don't want to miss what comes next. Is Charlene finally leaving the Monaco royal family? By the time 2022 rolled around, Charlene had stopped trying to blend in. She wasn't interested in being the quiet, polished figure in the background anymore. She showed up with a brand new haircut. It was short, sharp, and impossible to ignore. It didn't feel like a style change. It felt like a statement. She wasn't dressing for the cameras or the crown. She was dressing for herself. And just like that, everyone realized this wasn't the same woman they had watched for years. Something in her had shifted. The clothes told a story too. She ditched the floaty gowns and safe choices. No more soft pastels and vintage silhouettes that screamed Grace Kelly tribute. She started wearing bold lines, tailored fits, and pieces that didn't ask for approval. She wore what made her feel strong. There were no royal signals in her outfits anymore. No signs of a woman asking for acceptance. Her fashion was louder than her words ever were. It told people she was done playing palace games. She still wasn't talking, not in interviews, not in speeches, not in any way people expected. But her silence didn't feel empty. It had weight now, purpose. She didn't need to speak because her presence, or sometimes her absence, said it all. The way she walked into a room without waiting for Albert. The way she posed for photos with a straight face, no forced smiles. The way she kept people guessing without saying a single word. She was no longer the woman trying to prove she belonged. She was the woman who realized she didn't owe anyone anything. And when she did appear next to Albert, it didn't feel like a couple stepping out. It felt like two people doing a job. No affection, no spark, just public duty. They stood side by side, but worlds apart. They didn't glance at each other, they didn't touch. It was like watching two people who once shared a life but now just share a calendar. The difference was impossible to miss. This was no longer a fairy tale, it was a quiet contract. Palace sources confirmed that things had changed too. People close to the family started whispering about a new Charlene, one who wasn't going to every single event just because it was expected. One who said no. One who stopped letting the palace script her every move. There were reports of firm boundaries, fewer appearances, more time with her kids, less time playing the princess. That is not all. Charlene wasn't being rude. She was being clear. She had finally drawn a line, and this time she meant it. That coldness people used to point out, it wasn't cold at all. It was survival. It was how she protected herself from the pressure, from the heartbreak, from constantly being treated like a fragile outsider. This was someone who had been through the storm, alone, and made it back on her own terms. The fairy tale was long gone. But maybe, just maybe, something more real was starting to take its place. Now the cameras are back. The spotlight hasn't dimmed. But Charlene isn't playing along the same way. She shows up when she wants. She disappears when she needs to. She doesn't overshare. She doesn't pretend. There's a strength in her silence now, a quiet signal that she may still be part of the royal picture, but she's no longer letting it define her. And that's the shift everyone felt. This wasn't about crowns or castles anymore. It was about a woman slowly reclaiming her own narrative. People started looking at Charlene differently, not as the missing princess, but as someone who had been hiding in plain sight for years and was finally stepping into her truth. She wasn't running from the palace. She was rewriting her place inside it. The whole world is now waiting to see her next move, and when it happens, we'll be the first to let you know. Thank you for staying with us. So what do you think Charlene is up to next? Share your opinions with us in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will enjoy it.